All right, so we're going to talk now about how executive function fits into academic proficiency. And this is kind of the big picture stuff, okay? Because it helps to understand the instructional interventions that we'll be talking about together if you have this sense of where they fit into the bigger picture. So there are three overlapping areas of academic proficiency. One being language and literacy skills, right? Listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So oral and written language. Another being study skills, which are the flexible and appropriate use of strategies for, and here's the key word, for managing materials, time, and language. And the third area is what we call self-efficacy, right? This is where the emotional piece comes in. Self-awareness, self-assessment. You have to have self-awareness to be able to assess yourself, right? And self-advocacy, which is being able to use your language skills to ask for the assistance and the support that you need. And all of these come together under self-efficacy, which is really that the confidence that your actions will lead to achieving your goal. So in order to achieve academic proficiency at whatever grade level you are in school, all three of those areas need to be developing really simultaneously and successfully. And they develop against a backdrop of attention, memory, and executive function. And that's why it says that in the background, because you need to be able to focus your attention. So you have to be able to manage your attention. Your executive function needs to manage your attention in order to learn the kinds of skills that are listed in those white bubbles. Your memory has to be functioning successfully in order to learn and develop those skills. And your executive function has to be coordinating all of these things together. It's a very complicated process, but I put it in a slide like this so you can sort of pull out, because one of the things that we do in the classroom as teachers is we're like investigators, right? Where if a student is not succeeding, we got to figure out why. If a student is succeeding, we got to figure out why, right? Because we want to know what's working and why, and what's not working and why not. So what we're going to do on the next slide is just pull out where it says language and literacy skills up there. I'm going to pull out this bubble because I want to delve into it a little bit and how it relates to executive function. And this is what is called the language box. Anne's going to be talking a lot more about this tomorrow morning as well. This is one of those slides that we'll revisit. But I just want to put it in front of you because it's showing you in a grid the different skills. So if you read from, I should have brought my laser pointer. If you read from the top left down, the receptive language skills, right? The receiving skills, what's coming in, is listening and reading. Expressive language skills, the next column, is speaking and writing, right? What we're expressing out. All four of those are essential skills and certainly part of the Common Core for developing language and literacy skills. If you read across, right, oral language skills are listening and speaking, and written language skills, reading and writing. So it's an interesting way to think about language development. And which one is the box that I didn't talk about right then? Internal language. What does that mean? Self-talk, right? Your internal language is what's going on as you're working through any sort of goal-oriented task. And I would just ask you to just become aware of what's going on in your internal language, even through the day today. When are things, clicking along for you, and you're saying, oh, wow, this is interesting, this is cool, I didn't know that, oh, I want to learn more about that. And when are you saying, oh my God, I wish she would just shut up because I want to go to lunch. Because we all have that internal language. And the more that we can become aware of it, whether we're adults sitting in a room like this or we're kids sitting in the classroom, the more we can become aware and conscious of that internal language, the more self-aware we will be and the more able we are to self-advocate. As Anne was saying, the click and the clunk, right? So I need to be able to have enough internal language, to be aware of my internal language, and also to have the language skills to be able to talk to my teacher or my parent or the other kid in my group and say, oh man, I'm getting so frustrated with this because I'm feeling really stressed. I don't have enough time. Can I have some extra time? Right? Huge. That's a very complicated thing for a kid to ask, to be able to actually articulate, I'm frustrated because I'm feeling stressed out because I don't have enough time and I'm afraid I'm not going to be successful. Could I have some more time? That's executive function. That is self-awareness. That's part of self-efficacy and self-advocacy. It's study skills, which is managing time, right, and monitoring how successful am I being and working within a time frame. And it's language skills, being able to actually frame what I need in language that my teacher or whoever I'm asking can understand. So we're going to talk a lot about managing language as part of executive function. And you might think about executive function as being the part of executive function that you could be really conscious of is that self-talk that's going on in your own mind. I'm going to talk about, the next slide's going to be on study skills. So we talked about the listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills on the language and literacy box. And then we have study skills. And what's inside there too? Internal and external language. So study skills involves management of time, language, and materials. And in order to do that successfully, you have to have knowledge and strategies that combine into routines. And you have to have cognitive and emotional flexibility, right? If it's not working, what do I do next? Right? Have to be able to shift approaches when things go clunk, as Anne said. And how is that all monitored and coordinated? Again, through language, through internal language. And then the last piece is self-efficacy. Okay, these are just separate slides on each of those bubbles of academic proficiency. But in order to have confidence in my success, I need to be able to have self-awareness and self-advocacy. And all of that comes from, again, internal and external language. My ability to talk to myself, which is really thinking, right? Thinking in language. And also to be able to express myself, to say what I need, to say what I've learned, and to say what my goals are and what I want to achieve next, all the things that we do as students. So those three areas, language and literacy skills, study skills, and self-efficacy, all require executive function. And these facets of executive function, focus, activation, focus, effort, emotion, and memory. All very complicated. So just a couple things to leave you as thinking about. We have a few more slides left. And it's a lot of packing in a lot of information. And again, the goal here is just to give you an overview, get you thinking a little bit about what might be happening in your students' brains in the classroom, as well as your own brains, right? So I put this slide up here. It's, to me, actually, if I had to pick one slide for teaching, this would be it for effective teaching. And it's called the Gradual Release of Responsibility Model. It was developed many years ago by a man named P. David Pearson. This particular image I like. This came from some researchers. And basically, it is showing us the move from external to internal. And that move from external to internal can be in a skill. It could be a piece of knowledge, content knowledge. It could be executive functioning. But what do? We start with the teacher responsibility. And the teacher responsibility is to teach the student, right? To have a focused lesson. All right, I do it. I tell you, you know, how it's done. I'm going to show you how it's done. I'm modeling it for you so that you get the picture. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is what you're supposed to understand. And then the next level is the guided instruction. All right, where still the teacher is still really primarily responsible for most of this, but the students are doing it with him or her. And you can see, you can sort of barely see in the green on the right, it says, we do it. So let's say you're a math teacher, and you are showing students how to solve a certain kind of equation. And you put it up on the board, and you talk through it, and you talk through the steps that you take to solve the equation. And the kids watch, and they listen, and they see the model, and you show the different parts of the equation. And then you say, okay, let's do one together. You know, and you put another one up on the board, and you might involve them a little bit, right? And talk through it again. You might have a student come up to the board who feels really confident and talk through it with the rest of the class. Still pretty much teacher-driven, right? Where the teacher's responsible. And then as you see students are starting to get it, you say, okay, you know, we've done it together. Why don't you guys do it together? And I'll watch. All right, so it's still guided instruction, but a little less guidance. So that's when you get kids working in groups or in pairs, and you're walking around the classroom, and you're making sure, and you're correcting here and there, and say, oh, well, wait, maybe you want to think about it this way, and students can ask you questions, and you're watching, and you could tell pretty darn quickly, if you do this, you could tell pretty darn quickly who's getting it and who's not, right? And so you can make some shifts before you move into this last piece. Because the last piece is, all right, now it's time for you to try it on your own. And if you have a group of students who aren't ready to try it on their own yet, then you pull them to the table with you, and you go over it again with them. You know, while other people are practicing it on their own, and then you send them off when they're ready. All right, this is one of the things that interrupts the failure cycle. Right, if you're approaching instruction like this, modeling, guided practice, watching while students practice together, and you do those steps before you expect independent application, the chances of you interrupting that failure cycle are much better. Because you'll know ahead of time who's going to succeed and who's not, and you can intervene in there. And this is the slide I was talking about. We're coming right to the end here. Is what are the interferences? And here's really the crux of it. In terms of when you're thinking about your students or yourself in your own lives, where are things going wrong? All right, so if the center is I have a goal, things could go wrong at any place along this, right? I have a plan. Guess what? If I don't have a plan, I'm not going to be very successful in achieving my goal. I know what to do. Okay, somebody brought up earlier, a lot of times students do poorly because they don't even know how, right? They don't know what to do and they don't know how to do it. I begin. We've got lots of kids, they sort of have the plan, they know what to do, they know how to do it, like you're cleaning out your storage area. You just couldn't begin. You know, what's going on there? Initiation. I work through each step. All right, so some people begin. Think about people you know, right? Some people begin things and then they can't continue for whatever reason. You know, they get started and then it goes away. Think about diets, exercise plans, things like that. I work through each step. It takes patience and persistence. Okay, whether it's a diet or an exercise plan or writing a research paper, right? I recognize and adjust to difficulty. How many students do you know who chug along, right? I'm finished! And you look at it, you're like, oh man, you know, like they left 10 things blank on the test, right? Or the paper's half as long as it's supposed to be, or they haven't followed the directions. Well, what's happened is they didn't recognize when their task was not matching what the expectation was. So something went wrong there. I complete the tasks. Now, every single one of us has kids in our classes who have done all of their homework, and guess what? It's in their room, it's in the bottom of the backpack, it just never actually gets handed in. And that's where things can go wrong. And then finally, I reflect on what worked so I can use those strategies again. A lot of kids, particularly students who have ADHD or executive function issues, language-based learning disabilities, may have been really successful and used the strategies and talked about the strategies, and then like a month later, they have the same kind of task to do, and you say, okay, well, how did you do this before? I don't know. Yeah, well, let's think back. God, I don't even remember that. And so it's really important at the end of a task, whatever the task is, to have them really reflect. And sometimes, it's at the end of every day. A quick, 1-minute thing. What strategies did you use today that were successful in the classroom for you? And then all of these things show up against a background of, I should, I want to, effort, and motivation. And so we wonder how anyone in our classrooms are successful when things could go so wrong at so many different places. But I think that it's helpful to look at this as you're thinking about students to try to see, okay, where are the interferences? Where might things be going wrong that I can help students and talk to students about so that we can start to look at some strategies to allow them to be successful. I'll just leave that slide up for a minute so you can think about this. 2 different kinds of executive function issues. The bottom up is when students who have interferences with language skills, students with language-based learning disabilities, that interferes with their development of executive function. For the very reasons we were talking about with internal language, with that fluency of internal language. And so that's sort of what we would call a bottom-up interference. There's also a top-down interference that students who have deficits in their executive functioning, ADHD, for example, that interferes with their developing academic proficiency skills. So those are the kinds of students, for instance, who they're not reading, let's say. They're having terrible time learning how to read, but it's not because they're dyslexic. It's because they cannot focus their attention for long enough to acquire the skills. And sometimes we see those kids start on medication and suddenly they're reading, and it's like magic. That's a different kind of kid than a student who has language-based learning disability and really has difficulty making a plan for how to approach a task and self-monitoring, because they really are lacking the language skills to talk themselves through a task to achieve a goal. So it's sort of two different kinds of executive function, if that makes sense. The interventions are similar, but it's just worth thinking about the two different kinds. And so that just transitions us into, what do we see in our classes? And I have two Calvin cartoons here, which I like. Two very different, same child, but two very different kinds of behaviors. And the first one, this is, interesting executive function issues. Problems often look overwhelming at first, he says to Hobbes. The secret is to break problems into small, manageable chunks. If you deal with those, you're done before you know it. For example, I'm supposed to read this entire history chapter. It looks impossible, so I break the problem down. You focus on reading the first section. I ask myself, do I even care? Where is Calvin in the failure cycle here? Okay. And then we get the impulsive kid. Miss Wormwood, yes, Calvin, you can present the material, but you can't make me care. Rumor has it she's up to 2 packs a day, unfiltered. This one always reminds me of a kid we carpooled with for a number of years. It was in my son's class, and he was getting suspended on a regular basis and had executive function disorder and was very disruptive in school. Because guess what? He was motivated to do what? To get out of school. Yeah, he was avoiding. And so he would say terrible things, and he'd get pulled out of class or sent to the principal or suspended. He was motivated, he just wasn't motivated to do what people wanted him to do.